Welcome back to Terror and Urban Myths. Thanks for joining us for another chilling exploration of the unexplained. Don't forget to subscribe and give this episode a like if you enjoy what you hear. Tonight we're brewing up a tale that might leave you looking over your shoulder the next time you put the kettle on. The legend of the whistling ghostly teapot.
This myth is particularly interesting because it takes a symbol of comfort and domesticity, the teapot, and turns it into something unsettling. It makes you question the safety and familiarity of your own home.
It really plays on that primal fear, doesn't it? The idea that even the most mundane objects in our homes could be connected to something sinister. So tell me, where did this legend originate?
The exact origins are difficult to trace, as is often the case with folklore. But similar stories of household objects taking on a supernatural life appear in cultures around the world. It seems to be a universal fear that the things we surround ourselves with might not be as inert as we think.
That's a fascinating point. It suggests that this fear is rooted in something deeper than just a spooky story. Is it about a loss of control, maybe? The idea that even in our own homes, there are forces we can't understand or control.
Precisely. These stories often reflect anxieties about the boundaries between the known and the unknown, the safe and the dangerous. The whistling teapot, in this case, becomes a symbol of that boundary being breached, of the supernatural intruding into the mundane world of our everyday lives.
And that intrusion is often depicted in a very specific way, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always late at night, the house is quiet, and then suddenly this piercing whistle cuts through the silence, seemingly coming from the kitchen.
Yes, the setting is crucial in building suspense and a sense of unease. The late hour, the darkness, the silence. They all contribute to a heightened sense of vulnerability, making the sudden, unexpected sound of the whistling teapot all the more jarring.
It makes you think about how our senses can be so easily deceived, especially when we're already feeling anxious or on edge. We hear a sound, and our minds immediately try to make sense of it, often filling in the gaps with our own fears and expectations.
That's right. And in the case of the ghostly teapot, the most logical explanation. Someone in the house making tea is immediately ruled out. This creates a cognitive dissonance, a gap between what we perceive and what we know to be true. And it's in that gap that the supernatural explanation takes root.
So what you're saying is that the whistling ghostly teapot isn't just about a spooky sound. It's about how our brains try to make sense of the unknown, especially when it intrudes into our safe spaces. It taps into something very primal within us.
Exactly. And what makes this particular legend so compelling is that it doesn't offer any easy answers. It leaves the listener with the question, who or what is causing the teapot to whistle? Is it a mischievous spirit, a warning from beyond, or simply a trick of our own minds?
That ambiguity is what keeps us coming back to these stories, isn't it? We crave the thrill of the unknown, the possibility that there might be something more out there lurking just beyond our perception. But we also fear what that something might be.
It's a delicate balance between fascination and fear. And it's that balance that makes legends like the whistling ghostly teapot so enduring. They allow us to explore those primal emotions in a safe, controlled way through storytelling and shared experience.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's like a safe way to confront our fears and anxieties about the unknown. Now, for our listeners, what are some of the common interpretations of the whistling ghostly teapot? Is it seen as a benevolent or malevolent entity?
That's where things get really interesting, because the legend itself doesn't dictate a specific interpretation. It's open to individual beliefs and cultural contexts. In some cultures, a whistling teapot might be seen as a sign of good luck or a visitation from a friendly ancestor.
That's a much more comforting interpretation than I was expecting. So it's not always about a menacing presence?
Not necessarily. In other cultures, the whistling teapot might be interpreted as a warning, a harbinger of misfortune, or even a sign that a spirit is trapped and seeking help.
That's a much more unsettling thought, isn't it? The idea that a seemingly innocent sound could actually be a cry for help from beyond the grave. It makes you wonder about the other noises we might be ignoring in our homes, doesn't it? What if every creak and groan is actually a message from the other side?
It certainly makes you think twice about dismissing things as simply the house settling, doesn't it? But that's the power of these legends. They challenge our assumptions about the world and make us consider alternative explanations for the things we experience.
And on that unsettling note, I think we'll pause here for a moment. For our listeners who are just joining us, make sure to subscribe to Terror and Urban Myths so you don't miss out on our explorations into the strange and unexplained.
It's interesting how these legends often tap into our deepest fears and anxieties.
It's almost as if these stories give shape to our fears, allowing us to confront them in a way that feels safe, because it's through narrative and imagination.
Exactly. The whistling ghostly teapot, for instance, plays on our fear of the unknown. The fear that something might be lurking in the shadows of our homes, unseen and unheard, until it chooses to reveal itself.
And the fact that it chooses to reveal itself through such an ordinary object, a teapot, makes it even more unsettling.
Absolutely. It disrupts our sense of normalcy, making us question the very foundation of our reality. If a teapot can become a conduit for the supernatural, then what else can?
It's like the world suddenly becomes a much more mysterious and potentially dangerous place.
Precisely. It's a reminder that we don't have complete control over our surroundings, that there might be forces at play that we can't fully comprehend.
It makes you wonder about all the other unexplained phenomena that people have reported throughout history. Are these just stories, or could there be some truth to them?
That's a question that has fascinated humans for centuries. And while science has provided explanations for many things that were once considered supernatural, there are still mysteries that defy rational explanation.
And it's those mysteries that keep us intrigued, isn't it? The possibility that there might be something more to the universe than we can currently understand.
Absolutely. It's that sense of wonder and curiosity that drives us to explore the unknown, to seek out answers to the questions that have plagued us for generations.
But how do we separate genuine paranormal experiences from misinterpretations or even hoaxes?
That's where critical thinking comes in. It's important to approach these stories with a healthy dose of skepticism, to look for natural explanations before jumping to supernatural conclusions.
So we shouldn't dismiss these stories outright, but we should also be cautious about accepting them as fact without proper investigation.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between open-mindedness and critical thinking. We should be open to the possibility of the unknown, but also be willing to question our assumptions and look for evidence to support our beliefs.
And when it comes to the whistling, ghostly teapot, what kind of evidence could we look for?
Well, in many cases, these types of experiences are subjective and difficult to prove or disprove. However, we can examine the psychological and cultural factors that might contribute to such beliefs.
For example, you mentioned earlier that these stories often reflect our anxieties about control and safety. Could it be that our fear of the unknown manifests itself in these seemingly paranormal experiences?
That's certainly a possibility. Our minds are incredibly powerful, and they can sometimes trick us into perceiving things that aren't actually there.
Like the whistling teapot. Maybe it's not a ghost at all, but just our own subconscious fears projecting themselves onto the world around us.
That's one interpretation. And it's supported by research on things like pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random or vague stimuli.
So our brains are hardwired to find patterns even when they don't exist. Could that explain why some people see faces in clouds or hear voices in random noises?
It's certainly a factor, and when you combine that with our innate fear of the unknown, it's not hard to see how a whistling teapot in a dark, quiet house could be interpreted as something supernatural.
It's like our imaginations fill in the blanks, creating a narrative that fits our fears and expectations.
Exactly, and once that narrative takes hold, it can be difficult to shake even in the face of evidence to the contrary.
So the whistling ghostly teapot and other legends like it could be seen as a reflection of our own psychology, our way of coping with the uncertainty and anxieties of life.
That's a very insightful observation, and it highlights the importance of understanding the human element in these stories. It's not just about ghosts and goblins. It's about how we perceive the world and make sense of our experiences.
And that brings us to another interesting aspect of this legend, the interpretation of the teapot's intentions.
Right. Is it a benevolent spirit trying to communicate with us? Or a malevolent entity trying to scare us?
Or could it be something else entirely, something we haven't even considered?
That's the beauty of these stories. They leave room for interpretation for individual beliefs and cultural perspectives to shape the narrative.
In some cultures, the whistling teapot might be seen as a sign of good luck, while in others, it might be seen as a warning of impending doom. It all depends on the cultural context.
Exactly. And that cultural context is crucial to understanding the significance of these legends. They're not just random stories, they're reflections of our shared beliefs, fears, and hopes.
It's like each culture has its own unique way of explaining the unexplained, of making sense of the mysteries of the universe.
Precisely. And by studying these legends, we can gain a deeper understanding of the human condition, of the things that unite us and divide us as a species.
It's a reminder that we're all connected through our shared experiences, our fears, and our hopes, even if we express them in different ways.
And sometimes those expressions take the form of a whistling teapot in a dark, quiet house.
A sound that can evoke both fear and fascination, depending on who's listening.
And that's the power of storytelling, to tap into our emotions, to challenge our assumptions, and to make us think about the world in new and different ways.
For our listeners, what are some other examples of household objects taking on a supernatural life in folklore?
Oh, there are countless examples from cultures around the world. We have stories of haunted mirrors, possessed dolls, and even furniture that moves on its own.
It seems like anything can become a vessel for the supernatural if you believe in it strongly enough.
That's true to some extent, but it's also important to remember that these stories are often rooted in real-world experiences and anxieties.
For example, the fear of being watched or followed might manifest itself in the legend of a haunted mirror.
Exactly. Or the fear of losing a loved one might be reflected in the story of a possessed doll that seems to retain the spirit of a deceased child.
It's fascinating how these stories can be both terrifying and comforting at the same time.
They offer us a way to confront our fears and anxieties, to explore the unknown, and to find meaning in the seemingly random events of life.
And sometimes they even offer a glimpse into the beliefs and values of different cultures.
Precisely. They're a window into the human psyche, a reflection of our shared hopes, fears, and dreams.
On that note, let's take a moment to thank our listeners for joining us on this journey into the world of the whistling ghostly teapot and other spooky tales. Don't forget to subscribe to Terror and Urban Myths for more explorations into the strange and unexplained. We've been talking about household objects taking on a supernatural life, and it's making me think about how our ancestors used to view the world.
It's fascinating how our understanding of the world has evolved over time, right?
Back then, people didn't have scientific explanations for so many phenomena, so they turned to folklore and mythology to make sense of things.
Exactly. The world must felt like a much more mysterious and unpredictable place back then.
Imagine hearing a teapot whistling in the dead of night without any logical explanation.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to see how that could be interpreted as a sign of the supernatural, right?
Especially when you consider the cultural and religious beliefs of the time.
Many cultures believed in spirits and deities that could interact with the physical world.
So it's not surprising that these beliefs found their way into folklore and became intertwined with everyday objects.
These stories served a purpose. They provided explanations for the unexplainable and helped people cope with their fears.
But even today, with our advanced scientific knowledge, these stories continue to fascinate us.
I think it's because deep down we still crave mystery and wonder. We're still drawn to the unknown.
And these legends remind us that there are still things in the world that we can't fully explain.
They keep alive the possibility of something beyond our current understanding.
So the next time you hear a strange noise in your house, don't be too quick to dismiss it as just the house settling.
It might be a sign of something more, or it might just be your imagination playing tricks on you.
Either way, it's a reminder that the world is a strange and wonderful place full of mysteries waiting to be explored.
And that's what makes life so interesting, isn't it? The constant pursuit of knowledge and understanding.
Well said. And on that note, we'd like to thank our listeners for joining us on this exploration of the whistling ghostly teapot and the enduring power of folklore.
Remember, the world is full of stories, and sometimes the most fascinating ones are the ones that blur the lines between reality and imagination.
If you enjoyed tonight's episode, don't forget to subscribe to Terror and Urban Myths and give us a like. We'll be back next time with more tales from the shadowy corners of folklore and the unexplained. Until then, sleep tight and keep an ear out for any whistling teapots. You never know what might be lurking in the darkness.